In the sprawling plantations of 19th-century Brazil, where the sugarcane fields stretched endlessly under the blazing sun, one man's life tells a story so extraordinary and haunting that it has been almost lost to history. His name was José Florencio, though most knew him as Pataseka, towering over 7 feet tall. His strength and stature made him stand out among the enslaved, but this very distinction came with a heavy and tragic burden. Unlike others forced into grueling labor under the relentless whip, Pataseka's fate was different. He was chosen for a role no human should bear, to father children as part of a system designed purely to expand the labor force for the plantations. Over the course of his life, he would be compelled to father more than 200 children, each born into a life of servitude, each a testament to a system that treated human beings as property rather than people. This is not a story of privilege, despite the unusual treatment he received. It is a story of survival under impossible conditions, of humanity stripped away, of family bonds denied. Through Pataseka's life, we glimpse the cruel logic of slavery and the lengths to which it reached, invading the most private and sacred parts of human existence. Yet his story also shines a light on endurance, resilience, and the untold narratives that history has tried to erase. Today, we bring Pataseka's story to life, a story of pain, survival, and the echoes of a past that shaped generations. Join us as we uncover the truths that textbooks often leave behind, and help us keep these histories alive. If you find this story compelling, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another untold story from history's hidden corners. Together, we can remember, reflect, and honor those whose voices were silenced for too long. As the transatlantic slave trade began to wane in the early 19th century, the sprawling plantations of Brazil faced a crisis that threatened their very existence. The endless fields of sugarcane, coffee, and cotton demanded a constant flow of labor, and with the shipments of enslaved Africans slowing to a trickle, plantation owners confronted a dilemma that would shape the lives of countless men, women, and children. The solution they devised was as calculated as it was cruel: a systematic manipulation of the enslaved population itself, a practice that came to be known as slave breeding. In this grim calculus, human bodies were evaluated not for their individuality or spirit, but for their capacity to produce labor, their potential to create the next generation of workers whose lives would be devoted entirely to the plantations. Men of particular strength and stature, like Pataseka, were singled out for their perceived fertility, their physical traits seen as guarantees that the offspring would inherit qualities useful to the estate, whether it was endurance in the fields, the ability to perform heavy labor, or traits that would satisfy the deeply entrenched prejudices of the buyers and overseers. Women, from the moment they reached puberty, were reduced to vessels for reproduction, their own desires, families, and health subordinated to the relentless demands of production. Pregnancy was not a personal milestone or a celebration of life, but a mechanism by which the plantation ensured its future labor supply, each child representing another worker to sustain the economy of the estate. Men like Pataseka, while spared the backbreaking toil that claimed the lives of so many others, were trapped in a role that allowed no freedom, no intimacy, no choice, their very existence measured by how many lives they could bring into the oppressive machinery of slavery. The scale of this system was staggering, as entire generations were born into a life dictated not by love or kinship, but by the cold calculations of profit. Children were separated from their mothers, sold to distant estates, or raised under the constant supervision of overseers, learning from the earliest age that their worth was measured in labor and obedience. The relationships that might have bound families together were deliberately severed, erasing the threads of identity, culture, and memory that might resist the plantation's control. Even those who survived the grueling labor and constant monitoring found their lives defined by a system that treated them as commodities rather than human beings, their personal histories overwritten by the plantation's endless appetite for productivity. Brazilian slave breeding was not merely a local practice, but a reflection of a broader adaptation across the Americas. Yet in Brazil, the scale and organization of the plantations magnified its impact. The landowner's obsession with efficiency and control transformed the natural act of reproduction into an industry, with men and women alike subjected to schedules, pairings, and supervision designed to maximize output. Every decision, from which women were chosen to which men were selected to father children, was driven by the pursuit of profit and the relentless desire to maintain the labor force without relying on foreign supply. The human cost was immense. Lives lived under constant surveillance, personal autonomy stripped away, and the bonds of family systematically dismantled, leaving generations to navigate a world where love and kinship were secondary to economic calculation. Through it all, the story of Pataseka stands as both an individual narrative and a lens into this brutal system. His extraordinary height and strength made him uniquely valuable in the eyes of the plantation owners, yet the privileges he enjoyed, better food, less field work, occasional mobility, were inseparable from the oppression that defined his life. His body became a tool, his very being measured for its reproductive potential, a living instrument in the orchestration of human lives as economic assets. In examining this period, it becomes clear that the practice of slave breeding was not incidental but central to the survival of plantations, a chilling reminder of how deeply the logic of profit could invade the most private and personal aspects of human existence, turning reproduction itself into a means of control, and shaping a society in which the bonds of family and identity were subordinated to the unyielding demands of a system built entirely on human labor. Despite being spared the most grueling tasks in the fields and provided with better food and care than many of his fellow enslaved men, Pataseka's life was defined by a different kind of bondage, one far more intimate and invasive than the labor of planting or harvesting. His body, towering and strong, was valued not for the man he was, but for the children he could produce, and from a young age, every aspect of his existence became dictated by the expectations of others. The freedoms he appeared to have: slightly lighter work, relative mobility across the plantation, and access to medical attention, were hollow privileges, inseparable from the role imposed upon him. He could not form meaningful relationships, express affection, or cultivate family bonds in the ordinary sense, because his life had been repurposed into a function, a mechanism to perpetuate the plantation's labor force. Each child he fathered represented profit, an investment in the future of the estate, and not the continuation of kinship or love. In this way, Pataseka's humanity was gradually overshadowed by the system that controlled him. The women forced into reproductive labor alongside him endured repeated pregnancies, exhaustion, and deprivation, their personal autonomy stripped entirely, and the children born of these unions were removed from natural familial structures almost immediately, sold or assigned to work as the plantation dictated. For Pataseka, witnessing this cycle was a constant reminder of what had been taken from him, a life where he could not nurture, guide, or protect the very offspring he brought into the world. Even as he survived longer than many men in the same conditions, the endurance came at a profound personal cost: the erasure of fatherhood, the impossibility of intimacy, and the loss of identity. He was present in the lives of hundreds of children in body, but absent in every meaningful way that defines family. The plantation, with its meticulous oversight and obsessive focus on productivity, reduced human relationships to economic transactions. Births were scheduled, bodies monitored, and traits carefully noted to ensure the strongest possible workforce. And in this world, natural bonds of affection were viewed as liabilities. Love, parental care, and the simple joys of family life were luxuries that the system could not tolerate. Pataseka, in this environment, became both extraordinary and tragic. He lived longer, healthier, and perhaps more visibly than many around him, yet his very survival underscored the depths of control that had been exercised over him. Every movement, every pairing, every child brought into the world was a reminder that he belonged not to himself, but to the demands of a system that commodified human life. The psychological weight of such a role was immense. Pataseka's identity, which might have been defined by personal relationships, achievements, or community, was instead measured in numbers, each new child a ledger entry rather than a family member. His life was a paradox of privilege and oppression, spared the harshest labor, yet enslaved in a way that invaded the most private and human aspects of existence. Even after the abolition of slavery, the echoes of this control persisted, as the hundreds of children he had fathered remained strangers to him. scattered across estates or sold into distant households, a living testament to the system's capacity to destroy familial connection. Through Pataseka, the story of slavery in Brazil is revealed in its most intimate form, showing how a man could endure, survive, and yet be stripped of the very elements that make life human: intimacy, family, and identity, leaving a legacy defined not by presence, but by absence. The children born to Pataseka, like countless others on Brazilian plantations, entered a world where their lives were measured not in love or care, but in labor and economic value, and from the very moment of their birth, their existence was defined by rules imposed to maximize the plantation's productivity. These children were not recognized as sons or daughters in the way any family might hope. They were assets, meticulously recorded and assigned according to the needs of the estate, their futures dictated by overseers who saw them only as instruments of profit. Some were sold away at a young age, ripped from their mothers and the few moments of nurture they might have known, while others remained on the property, apprenticed to grueling work as soon as their bodies could bear it, learning that survival meant obedience and that any bond of affection was secondary to the machinery of plantation economics. Family connections, fragile even in the best circumstances, were deliberately severed, for the plantation owners understood that attachment might inspire resistance, negotiation, or rebellion, and so the bonds that could provide strength and continuity were dissolved before they could take root. Pataseka himself was acutely aware of this system, witnessing generations of his children live under conditions he could neither prevent nor influence. While he had been spared the unrelenting toil of the fields due to his role as a breeder, this apparent reprieve came with the ultimate cost. He could not nurture, guide, or share a father's presence with the hundreds of children he sired. Each new birth represented both survival and subjugation, a continuation of the plantation's workforce at the expense of intimacy, recognition, and family identity. The separation of children from mothers, the monitoring of pregnancies, and the careful planning of labor all reflected a calculated strategy to sustain the labor force entirely from within, to extract maximum value from every body under control, and to remove any element that might challenge the dominance of the estate. In this environment, the natural bonds of kinship were systematically replaced by rules, schedules, and surveillance, and the emotional life of every child and parent became subordinate to profit. This manipulation extended beyond immediate survival, shaping the social and psychological landscape for generations. Children who grew up without fathers or mothers to guide them internalized the message that their lives were not fully their own, that their identity was secondary to the needs of the plantation, and that autonomy was a luxury denied. For Pataseka, the reality was particularly acute. He existed simultaneously as a figure of endurance and as a reminder of the system's cruelty, his own presence a tool wielded by masters, his children scattered and largely unknown to him, his role in their lives reduced to biological function alone. The plantation's economy relied on such strategies: blending, coercion, surveillance, and meticulous record-keeping to perpetuate labor and eliminate the ties of human connection that might interfere with obedience. Every sale, every reassignment, every child removed from their parent was a calculated measure to ensure the estate's continuity, turning family into a mechanism of control rather than a source of support or identity. In examining the lives of Pataseka's children, the cruelty of the system becomes undeniable. Their daily existence was governed by labor expectations, punishment for perceived disobedience, and the constant awareness that their parents, even when nearby, held no authority over their futures. Through these practices, the plantation not only extracted physical work, but also reshaped the very meaning of family, embedding separation, obedience, and displacement into the social fabric of generations. Pataseka's story and the lives of his children reveal the stark reality of how slavery in Brazil extended beyond the field or the estate into the most personal dimensions of human life, where family ties were deliberately broken, intimacy denied, and the next generation molded to serve the relentless logic of profit, leaving a legacy marked by both survival and profound loss. When slavery was finally abolished in Brazil in 1888, after centuries of systemic exploitation and human suffering, Pataseka stepped into a world for which he had long been denied preparation, a world where the choices over his own life, his family, and his labor finally belonged to him. For decades, his body had been governed by the relentless demands of plantation owners, his strength, health, and even his personal time assigned to sustaining a labor system that treated him as a mechanism rather than a man, and the hundreds of children he had sired under coercion were scattered across estates, living as strangers both to him and to one another. With freedom, Pataseka could begin to reclaim a life that had been denied, to define relationships not by profit or oversight but by care, choice, and connection. He married a woman named Palmyra, a union grounded in mutual consent and affection, and together they raised 9 children, small in number compared to the hundreds he had fathered under compulsion, yet profoundly different in quality. These children represented something previously denied, the possibility of presence, of nurturance, of family life experienced as a human right rather than as a function imposed by others. In their upbringing, Pataseka could finally teach, guide, and love, forming bonds that slavery had systematically stripped from him. And in the small farm they established, cultivating sugarcane and producing modest sustenance, he could live as a man rather than as a tool. Yet even as he experienced this newfound freedom and the joys of natural fatherhood, the shadow of the past remained pervasive. The hundreds of children he had fathered under the plantation system were largely unknown to him, their lives dispersed across regions, their identities shaped by circumstances over which he had no control. The lineage he had created during his years as a breeder persisted in blood but not in presence, and any connection to him as a parent had been severed by the mechanisms of the system that had compelled him to serve its interests. Even as he built a family of 9, the knowledge that so many of his offspring would never know him, that his influence in their lives was erased by centuries of calculated control, was a persistent reminder of the cruelty that had defined the majority of his existence. His own experiences of survival, endurance, and adaptation highlighted the paradox of his life. He had lived long enough to see freedom, yet much of what he had sown, his progeny remained inaccessible, fragments of his story scattered and hidden from recognition. Despite this fractured reality, Pataseka's later years were a testament to resilience and human determination. His ability to nurture, provide, and witness the growth of children in a world he could control reflected a stark contrast to the years when every action had been dictated by plantation masters. While the system had attempted to reduce his identity to reproductive function and erase his kinship connections, the family he built in freedom was a reclamation of agency, a tangible assertion that human bonds, when permitted, could flourish even after decades of suppression. His story, encompassing both the hundreds of former children who remained strangers and the 9 he could raise with presence and care, embodies the enduring tension between oppression and autonomy, between legacy imposed and legacy chosen. In the arc of his life, from coerced fatherhood to natural family, Pataseka illustrates the profound capacity of human beings to reclaim meaning, intimacy, and identity, even when history has sought to strip them away, revealing that freedom is not merely the absence of chains but the restoration of connection, love, and self-determination. Pataseka's story stands as a stark testament to the extreme cruelty and calculated logic of slavery, a system that extended its control far beyond labor in the fields and deep into the most intimate aspects of human life. His life, forced into the role of a breeder to supply the plantation with future laborers, shows how the institution of slavery did not merely extract physical work but systematically manipulated family, identity, and reproduction to maintain power and profit. Each child he fathered under coercion was not regarded as a son or daughter but as an asset, a unit of labor to be dispersed, sold, or exploited according to the demands of the estate. And through this, the system ensured that personal bonds, affection, and autonomy were stripped away. Even as Pataseka survived the grueling conditions that claimed the lives of many other enslaved men, the survival he experienced came at the cost of being reduced to a function, an instrument of a system that denied him the very experience of fatherhood and family life. His hundreds of children, born under these circumstances, were largely strangers to him, their lives shaped not by love or care but by the dictates of economic strategy, a haunting reminder of the deep and lasting scars inflicted by slavery. Yet within this story of suffering and exploitation, there is also a remarkable narrative of resilience, endurance, and humanity. Pataseka lived long enough to witness freedom, to marry Palmyra, and to raise 9 children in a way that he had never been allowed before, demonstrating that even after decades of control and dehumanization, the capacity for love, connection, and agency could endure. His descendants today, many of whom can trace their lineage back to him, carry forward both the legacy of survival and the echoes of trauma imposed by a system that sought to erase family and identity. Through this dual lens, Pataseka's life embodies the contradictions of history: profound cruelty alongside extraordinary resilience, enforced separation alongside the possibility of connection, exploitation alongside the reclaiming of agency. His story forces us to confront the ways in which slavery was not only an economic system, but a social one that infiltrated every aspect of life, and how the effects of such a system can reverberate across generations. By remembering Pataseka, by tracing the threads of his life and the lives of his children, we honor the human beings behind the historical records, acknowledging both their suffering and their strength. His life reminds us that the consequences of slavery are not just statistics in a ledger, but lived experiences, marked by endurance, resistance, and the pursuit of dignity in even the harshest conditions. As we reflect on his story, we recognize the resilience of those who survived, the deep wounds inflicted on families, and the ways in which human spirit can persist despite systemic oppression. Thank you for joining us to explore this untold history. If Pataseka's journey moved you or deepened your understanding of the human cost of slavery, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to continue uncovering hidden narratives and sharing stories that history almost erased, ensuring these lessons and legacies are remembered for generations to come.